The Threads holiday sale is underway. You can save 20% on favorite titles such as Kenneth D. King's Smart Fitting Solutions, Louise Cutting's How to Fit a Changing Figure DVD set, and Claire Schaefer's Couture Sewing Book and DVD series. Visit tauntonstore.com and use code GIFT20.
Welcome to Sewing with Threads, the monthly podcast by the staff of Threads magazine. This is our first videotaped podcast, so thank you for joining us. I'm your host, Threads editor Sarah McFarland, and I'm joined by Threads staff members.
Hi, I'm Carol Frazier, the senior technical editor.
Hi, I'm Janine Clegg, senior copy production editor.
Hello, I'm Erica Redfern, the assistant editor.
I think we're going to have fun with our topic today. It's beautiful, endlessly challenging fabric.
This is 5 speedy sewing questions. Today, it's our assistant editor, Erica Redfern, in the hot seat. Erica, here we go. Who taught you to sew?
I'm actually mostly self-taught. A lot of times, me learning something new, I look up a video on YouTube, I read material, and the Thread staff has been really helpful in helping me with different techniques if I can't figure it out by myself.
Okay, great. And what's your favorite sewing term?
This is a hard one. There's a lot of good sewing terms out there. I think I would have to go with armscye because I like the way it sounds. I'm very into the sound of words, so I like that it sounds like arm's eye, as in the place where you thread your arm through.
Ah, I like that. All right, and what are you currently sewing?
I actually just finished up a project, so for my next project is either going to be a Vogue dress or it's been so chilly in the past couple of days, I've been thinking I could really go for a sweatshirt dress. I have a paprika pattern that it's looking really good right now.
So long sleeve, short sleeve, full, narrow?
Long sleeve, tunic length. I'm thinking I'll probably do the hood version.
Oh, I think I know that pattern.
Yeah.
It's very cute.
Oh, great. Cool. We can't wait to see it. You'll have to give us progress reports, bring it in, see how you're doing.
I can't wait to wear it.
All right. And what's your favorite fabric to sew?
My answer to this is actually a little bit controversial, I think. A lot of people aren't necessarily big fans of it, but I really like to sew with knits. Whenever I put a lot of work into something, I want to make sure it's something that I'm going to use, and knits are a fabric that I love to wear. So it's the most fun for me to sew because I can see myself wearing the finished product, and that is really satisfying to me.
And in fact, we did see you wearing a knit dress that you made just the other day. It turned out great. It had a beautiful little print on it. It had owls and other woodland kind of motif to it. Very nice.
As a relatively new sewer, do you find knits particularly challenging, or do you think they're pretty manageable?
I actually haven't had a lot of trouble with it so far. Mm-hmm. I have a walking foot on my machine that helps a lot so it doesn't stretch, and I really just take a little bit of extra time to make sure that I'm cutting properly and that I've got everything lined up when I pin. And I haven't had any major problems so far.
Yeah, that's good news for people who are kind of afraid to sew with knits.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true. All right, and what do you love most about sewing?
Another hard question. There's a lot of answers to this, and I think the biggest thing that I love about sewing is I love creating things, so I love being able to, at the end of the process, to say that I've put so much work into this, I can look at it, I can be proud of it, and it's something that I can show to other people and share that with them.
That's nice. I think a lot of people feel the same way. Well, thank you for answering the Sewing with Threads 5 speedy sewing questions. I know that was actually more than 5 questions, but we appreciate it. Thank you, Erica.
Thank you.
This episode is brought to you by Fit for Art Patterns. Sew successfully with Fit for Art's 3 core patterns to create one great wardrobe: the Tabula Rasa jacket, Eureka pants that fit, and Tabula Rasa knit patterns include fit options for a flattering and comfortable fit. Create new styles with variations for the core patterns. Find inspiration in Fit for Art's photo gallery and weekly blog. It's called So Let's Get Dressed. Visit fitforartpatterns.com and enjoy a 20% discount on December orders with the coupon code SewingWithThreads18.
Today, our edit team is talking about fabric. We're recording this episode right after we held an event in New York City, the Threads Experience. It was in early September, and a big part of the day was spent fabric shopping with the attendees. And I had a wonderful time looking at fabric all day, and it made me think about what I look for in fabrics, how I store them, and I thought we could all talk about that because I think it's really integral to the experience of sewing and being a sewer. So, did anybody spot any trends in the stores?
Well, I was actually in Botany Trim, so I wasn't where there was fabric much. But so I can't
But we
speak
went
to that.
around the day before.
We
a
did go
little bit.
around. Yeah. I'm not sure I can speak to trends because I don't usually follow that. I tend to kind of just look at what looks fantastic to me. And we did see just so many more really high-end, beautiful fabrics that we don't see typically when we're doing our usual shopping for fabric. And it was really inspiring. Metallics, some beautiful brocades.
I was going to say metallics,
unbelievable
I thought,
stuff.
was a big trend.
Yeah, and it was in everything from tweedy stuff all the way down to very light, shimmery kind of translucent fabrics. You could just find something metallic for almost anything. Oh,
Yes,
there was a
and
beautiful red metallic denim. I'm sorry, Janine. I was
no,
just
that's
it was
fine.
exciting metallic red denim. Well, that's
Ooh,
great. Yeah,
yes.
nice.
Well, and I saw two things actually worn by people because I also was in a trimming store. I saw a lot of animal prints, people wearing animal prints. In fact, someone was wearing animal print shorts, a gentleman, and I thought that was very trendy. And the other trend that I think I'm seeing more of this season overall, not just in the fabric stores, is plaids. People seem to be wearing plaid fabrics, whether they are wools, bouclés, or other types of fabric content. So I would say, yeah, that seems to be a trend.
I definitely saw a lot of textured fabrics, multiple techniques in particular fabrics. So you might have a metallic gazar with embroidery, just maximalism.
Yes.
Yeah.
exactly.
How about you, Erica? What'd you see?
Well, the fabric store that I was in, Fabrics and Fabrics, they had a lot of high-end fabrics. So there were brocades, jacquards, beautiful metallics, a lot of silks. And there was definitely a lot of metallics, a lot of texture. There was one fabric in particular that stands out to me. I think it was a brocade, and it had these textured bumps in it that reminded me of pebbles or scales, and it was just really dimensional and interesting. I would have liked to work with it if it wasn't a little bit out of my price range.
yeah, some of these fabrics were very expensive. So actually, that brings me to, what was the last fabric that you purchased? And I'll start with you, Erica.
Well, I made a purchase this weekend, or at the event, which I was trying to limit my spending, but I did buy a stretch cotton fabric that had an interesting geometric print that just sort of, I'm trying to break myself out of my comfort zone a little bit. I have a tendency to wear quiet prints, not a lot of color, and this had a louder print, a brighter color, and I was just really drawn to it.
It's going to be fun. And Carol?
I have to say that I've been on a fabric diet that has been broken a bit by the cleaning out of the thread stash somewhat. So I've gotten my hands on some very nice woolen fabrics which I didn't purchase, but I have sort of inherited for winter pants, some nice winter separates, basic kinds of things, and I'm looking forward to working with those. I have to say that when we were walking through the shops this past weekend, I was taken by the number of really, really sumptuous prints in silks and cottons and some linens and some really lovely blends. The colors are beautiful right now. There are many extremely multicolored prints with lots of different hues in them. But my complaint was everything that I really was drawn to, the motifs were gigantic. I don't know if you picked up on that. It felt to me like the trend
That's
was
true.
gigantic
It's true.
motifs. And by gigantic, I actually, there were large motifs that were maybe 6 to 8 inches in size, but gigantic, some of them 24 inches or more. And I love them. I just run right over and see them, but it's not something that I personally can wear that much. So there was a little bit of a kind of a wistfulness in my when I left the stores. Like, I wish I could buy those, but I know that I'm kind of overwhelmed by prints that are that big.
Yes, that's
But
true.
if you're bold and you can do it and you're statuesque, they are really stunning. And I think the other thing that would have to happen is if I thought about ways to cut them up nicely and reduce those motifs into smaller sizes, with the design of a garment, I could do it.
I finally found, after I think a couple years of looking, the exact charmeuse print that I want for the lining of a Chanel jacket. I had this beautiful black and sort of blue, spruce, piney green boucle, and I finally found a beautiful charmeuse print for that. The silk prints were really nice.
Yeah. Yeah.
So in the same color family, I assume.
Yes, the background, it was funny because I saw this print in one colorway, and I thought, oh, that would be perfect if it were a different color. And then I found the other colorway.
Success.
Yeah. How about you, Janine?
Well, I have been buying some wovens because I have a class that I'm teaching. It's just a basic sewing class, and the students needed a woven for little bags we were putting together. So I haven't done too much shopping for myself, although I did pick up a couple of beautiful sweater knits that are very lightweight to try to make a very simple shrug out of. So I'm looking forward to working with that because I really have not worked much with sweater knits.
Oh, nice. And we have a recent story about sweater knits.
That's right.
Yes.
And actually, when I was in Botany Trims, which is, I'm not complaining about being there. They do have some fabrics, and one thing that they had that I haven't seen elsewhere is a lot of knitted trims, like the kind of ribbing and stuff that you would put on, say, a bomber jacket or cuffs of something like that. And they had it in a wide range of colors. And actually, one of our event attendees asked me about the ribbing. It was a rather bold ribbing, about 4x4, maybe even more than that. And she wanted to buy some to make a sweater. I think that sweater knits are becoming more appealing to people to sew with right now, Janine. So I think you're on that trend. I have to say, I steered her away from those because they were stiffer than you'd really want for a full garment. But I could tell that she was getting into the idea of making herself some kind of a nice ribbed pullover.
Great. Nice. Well, there are so many fabric stores in Manhattan that do have a great selection of knits. So
yeah, I did see those in other places too. Yeah.
So my next question is, when you're sewing for yourself, is it fabric or pattern first?
I can jump in and say it's not really either for me. It's usually I have an idea of a garment that I need or want. Then I look for a pattern that I think can duplicate that and a fabric that will work with that. And I suppose the fabric might be part of it, but, I'll sort of think, I need black pants. What are they going to be like?
Oh, Carol, that's really smart. I wish I were more disciplined because for me, it's always fabric. I will see a fabric and I will have no idea what I'm going to do with it or when I'm going to sew with it, except in the case of like a lining. I knew I needed that, but fabric first.
Sarah, I did that for years. I did that for many years, and I had a shocking amount of fabric stashed away to the point that every time I moved, I had to kind of like get the movers to move it out before my husband saw how many bins I had of it. And it was kind of embarrassing.
Isn't fabric the heaviest substance in the world?
Yes. And when we were, when you're interviewing the movers and they go around, they do an inventory, and my husband would say, oh, those bins are just fabric. And the guy's like, oh, that's nothing. And I think, okay, fine. If that's, you should probably estimate in a few pounds for those bins while you're planning that. But I think I might have mentioned this before. We had a really drastic flood in my basement, and I lost probably 60 or 80% of my stash. I'm sort of sad about it, but it really cured me of that need to collect all the fabric. I don't do it as much. I look and I think I really love that, but I don't buy as much just because I probably won't get to sew a lot of it. That was the reality for me. I don't get to sew a lot of it, so it's fun. But I can I can sort of deny myself that a lot because vicariously I enjoy when you buy fabric, Sarah.
Thank you. I'll keep doing it then.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
I've been struggling with fabric. The entire Threads team has been warning me, don't buy fabric if you don't know what you're going to do with, because you don't want to develop a stash. It just builds and builds and builds. Mm-hmm. So I've been trying very hard to buy a pattern first and then figure out what I want to do with it, because I don't have room for a large stash right now, so I need to be able to know what I'm going to do with it.
That's smart.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
Right.
Plus
well, don't worry. You'll have scraps left over, and then it'll start building without you even trying.
Yeah. Well, my worst fear is that I find a fabric, the perfect fabric, and it'll be like half a yard short. And what if you never find it again? Then you're stuck with not quite enough fabric for what you really want to do.
Well, that's when you get creative and
It's
you
true.
That's
make
true, yeah.
you just have a panel with your
Yeah.
favorite fabric on your dress, like the front panel or
Contrasting sleeves.
Yes.
Lots of things.
Use a different fabric for the facings. Yeah.
Yeah, Janine actually is really good at that kind of thing, of creatively using or reusing fabrics, either for yourself or projects that you're making, or when you're teaching. I know that you
Right.
manage
Well,
to
we
recycle
try.
and upcycle, and
Trying.
Yeah.
It doesn't always work, but usually you find you're like, I must have this color in this huge stash that I have at home. I must have this color, this weight of fabric, this type of fabric I'm looking for, and half the time, no, you don't. So then you go out and buy. But I take the same approach that you do, Carol, when it comes to making a garment for myself. I usually have to think about, okay, what is it that I want? And then I pick the pattern and then the fabric, and hopefully there is something in the stash, so I don't have to go out and spend a ton of money on the fabric itself at the last minute. So,
How does everybody store the fabric that they have? I have a specific method that I like. I have all these cardboard boxes that are the exact same size. So when I've moved, they stack together. I know how many I can fit under my bed. And I usually get fabric home, serge the edges, wash it or treat it. However, I'm going to treat the garment later. Fold it up, and then the boxes are usually by season. I used to do by fabric type, like whether it were knit or woven, and that kind of falls in line with the seasons too. But now I do it by season, and I label the box with the date that I last added something to it.
oh, that's a good idea. I have those big Rubbermaid or whatever, those plastic totes, and I kind of separate it by knits, wovens, printed dress weight fabrics, that kind of stuff. So it's not seasonal, but it winds up being seasonal ultimately, yeah.
Yeah,
And I have some things. I have some nice wovens wools that I hang in a closet. And go in and I shake them up once in a while to see that there are no moths in there.
That's funny because when I actually take a fabric out to work on it, and sometimes this may take months, I'll iron it and then just fold it across the width and clip it into like a skirt hanger.
Yeah.
And you can clip in the notions. Usually I'll put a plastic baggie on the hanger too. I used to keep projects in jumbo plastic bags, but I like the hanging better.
Yeah.
Because you don't have to iron it again.
Right.
plus you sometimes have a fabric like velvet that you really should not be folding, and you can't get the creases out if it's been folded for a really long time. So we hang that, and when I say we, I'm talking about my mom and I. We we have this stash, and it's in multiple places. We are not quite as organized as you guys, I have to admit.
That's a good point, though, Janine. The Carol lost a stash because of a flood.
Yeah.
Yes.
But sometimes, due to improper storage, I have lost a few items, or I had some beautiful faux leather.
Yes.
And I didn't think about it. You know, it was sold to me folded. They folded it up at the store, but I should have rolled it. And now
Yes.
faux leathers, real leathers, I roll.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, there are a lot of fabrics that you really have to be careful that you not fold it because, you know, when you have a stash, you don't always get to that project to use that fabric right away. And if it's creased for any length of time, getting those creases out can sometimes be nearly impossible. Mm-hmm. I've often had to cut around, cut a pattern out or cut a project out around the crease because I couldn't get it out. And that's a little frustrating.
Yeah.
So,
What about the tragedy of moth damage?
oh, yes.
I do put a lot of cedar. I'm not crazy about mothballs, but sometimes
No,
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
avoid them at
really-
all costs. They're carcinogenic. They're,
that's true.
They're terrible.
I think that insects tend to be attracted by little tiny food stains that you don't know are on your clothing. That's why
Yes.
they make little holes right in the front of your favorite sweater that you thought looked perfect. So unsewn fabric doesn't tend to have that in it, which is good. So the attraction is maybe not quite as much as your sweaters and your jackets that are hanging in a closet or something. So it might not be as big a problem, but
Keeping them separate then is a good idea.
yeah, keeping them separate. I tend to keep a little I feel bad about it, but like a dry cleaning bag over it and then go down. And I have some of these folded fabrics. Anything that's in a bin I think is pretty safe in a plastic bin. But the hanging things are in a closet in the same room where I do all my cutting. And so when I go down there to cut things, I just kind of go in the closet and shake everything around like this a little bit. And because I think if you move it, the insects aren't in there. It's when you close things into a closet that they get in there and they are not disturbed.
They just
so
go
they
to
just
town.
kind of,
Yep.
yeah.
Right, and I'm sure anyone listening who has any knowledge of archiving things and museum collections and so on would be appalled if they heard that we were covering things with plastic.
Yeah.
You know, a cloth, a cotton cloth is good. You know,
Yeah.
a garment bag that is not made of plastic might probably be a better option. But yes, I think a lot of people do cover it in plastic because it's convenient. It's available.
Okay, I recently worked with a fabric that I expected to be easy to work with, and it turned out to be very intimidating. And I wanted to ask, does anybody else have an experience with a fabric that you really had to work to conquer? In my case, it was a linen with a metallic ribbon stripe.
Right, the
through
dress
it.
that you
Metallic,
made.
yeah.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
The dress did turn out beautiful, by the way.
It did turn out nicely, but there were some tears in there.
There's no crying in sewing, isn't that what we're supposed to say?
Yeah.
But I would love to take a poll of everybody who's listening now. How many people have cried over a project in their lives?
That's right. And probably it was just because you were really tired. It was the end of the
That's right.
day and something went wrong. And sometimes it's just good to get up and walk away from the machine for a couple of minutes. Erica, you have an experience that
I
like
have,
that, right?
Yeah. Very early on in my sewing, I tried out a sewing machine for threads, and the thread tension would not work. It kept pulling the bobbin thread through the surface, and no matter what I did, I adjusted the tension tighter, looser. Nothing worked. So eventually, I just turned the machine off. I left. I made myself a cup of tea, took some deep breaths, and when I came back, it had fixed itself.
Or you had fixed yourself. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know what it was, but it worked, and that's what mattered.
That's right. Good, good. Well, I know that didn't have to do with fabric, but
Yeah.
Sarah, how did you solve that problem?
Well, I made sure I didn't expect the fabric to be very difficult to work with. I thought that somehow I didn't expect the metallic threads to be as strong as they were. And so at first the needle would pull those stripes and it was creating puckers in the fabric. So I switched to a Microtex needle, a slimmer needle, a chrome-coated needle. So all those factors helped. I also found out that when I pressed this fabric, it was a linen, so I wasn't expecting to use a press cloth, but the metallic fibers would melt. And a press cloth was just enough of a layer to prevent the metallic fibers from melting onto the iron. So it was just spending more time and having the correct tools to work with that fabric.
Interesting.
That's a good point, because if the trend is working with more metallic fabrics, it's nice to be able to know what things you should be doing.
Yeah, we should
when
probably
working
do a
with it.
specific article on that.
I know. Well, we did have a fabric lab in the
We
past
did.
year about metallics, with the warnings about when you press it to be really careful. And yeah, I think that's definitely something that you have to do a lot of experimentation with before you really do it.
Yes, and I know you don't want to stop a lot of times to just take a little piece of the fabric and just work with it for a couple of minutes, just a little sample, make yourself a little test on your machine. But it is worth it in the end. It's a time-saving device in the end. You feel like, oh, I don't want to take 5 minutes for that, but it ends up being, probably a half an hour worth of saving time in the end.
I've actually really reached that point when I will not start sewing on a project unless I've taken even just some tiny bit of an offcut and sew a few inches down it to determine if the tension is good and the thread looks good and everything. Because I just have like a little tiny sense of panic if I don't do it first.
Oh my gosh,
It's
I always
weird,
have
yeah.
like a pile of the offcut pieces.
Yeah.
I snip
Yeah.
off anything
Right.
that's like really trailing,
Right.
but moderately squarish pieces.
Right.
And I'm very fussy about it. Anytime I rethread the machine or change the bobbin, I'll test the stitches again. And of course, any decorative stitches I'll test, buttonholes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And actually, that's what you asked, was there any fabric that is particularly challenging? And I have this dress that I made probably 4 years ago that's sitting there still waiting for buttonholes because it's made of probably polyester, some kind of synthetic chiffon fabric. And even though I made the facings and I interfaced them with a cotton voile so they have a little bit of body, I'm just really afraid to make the buttonholes in that dress, and I don't have any more scraps of it. I lost those at, did I lose them in the flood? I can't remember. I just don't have any more scraps, so I don't have anything to really practice on. I think I haven't hemmed it yet. So I think I can make a buttonhole way down, like
make some buttonholes in the hem
3/4 of an
allowance.
inch from the cut edge, and then if I don't like it, I'll just make the dress shorter. But that has been just hanging there for a long time, just with me being afraid to make those buttonholes. And I keep thinking, I should just ask Norma, how much does she charge for a buttonhole, and have her put the buttonholes in. But I'm like, I won't be defeated by this.
No, you can do it, Carol, definitely. What's the fabric you love the most to work with? Anybody?
I would say any natural fibers. I like wool and I like cotton. So I don't know. They appeal to me.
Yeah, like a nice, not necessarily a completely smooth surface wool, maybe more like a flannel. This is the sort of thing that Kenneth King would say, I'm sure, too. Just enough of a surface texture so that anything that you do with it can be kind of absorbed into or hidden by the nap a little bit. Of plain weave is really great because there's no need to match anything or worry about seams pulling apart. Just getting in there, it's those are a pleasure to sew. Yeah.
And they're a pleasure to press, just work with overall, and they look gorgeous on.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, lightweight cotton shirtings, which
Yes.
they're so beautiful to work
Yeah.
with because they press so nicely.
That's right. Yeah. I feel like they are easy to sew and easy to press, but they're also very easy to press kind of badly. Like, when you're doing collars and things on those, that's where I find myself worrying a little bit about, have I got my seam allowance as flat as I want for this fabric? Is my top stitching really even? It shows up not so well on that. I mean, it shows up badly if it's badly done on those kind of things. So I worry a little bit sometimes with those, that any possible irregularity is going to be glaringly obvious.
And Erica, you've been having great success with knits.
I have been. Everyone talks about how they have a lot of trouble with them, and I've been very lucky so far, knock on wood, that I'll keep having luck because I have a lot of knits in my stash right now. So I'm hoping
Well, you
that
probably picked good quality knits too, and that helps.
I'm hoping, yeah. Actually, the first dress that I sewed, you guys have seen it. It's a polyester knit. I had a bit of trouble with that. It was kind of slippery, and it didn't really like the stitches. It was a screen printed pattern, so a lot of times the stitches would pull the knit apart, so you'd see some pale from the white knit itself underneath the pattern in the stitching. But I just did some extra pinning, and it worked out.
Yeah, I think synthetic knits are like substantially more difficult than knits with primarily natural fibers. If you've been using some rayon type jerseys, I think, and some with cotton.
Yeah, the polyester.
They're a little bit easier. Yeah,
the maxi dress that I just finished recently was a cotton knit, and I really enjoyed sewing that one. It was a lot easier to work with.
Everybody, thank you for this discussion. I learned a few things.
This is Point and Counterpoint. Our topic for this episode is, what is your preferred method to understitch a facing?
Oh, this is interesting. A few years ago, I discovered how much I love understitching by hand. I like being able to have really precise control over those stitches and not try to wrestle with it on the machine.
What kind of a stitch do you use? Do you use a pick stitch or a little running stitch? Or
I would say it's a cross between a pick stitch and a back stitch.
Okay.
Because it's a back stitch, but I make them very tiny on the surface.
Okay.
Either that, or years ago we had an article from Susan Crane about using hand embroidery stitches to do your understitching, creating this beautiful touch on your garments. And I really like to do that if I have the time.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'll even go back and do that a little bit later. I'll do the understitching at the point in the process when it's required, but I can go back and embellish it if I like.
Yeah.
Now, Sarah, do you have a favorite needle that you use for this, and a favorite thread that you use? I love small needles, so that's why I'm asking.
I actually it's got to be a very sharp needle. I do like longer needles, and we can add it in the show notes. I'm not sure of the precise description, but there are some Japanese needles that Susan Kalji recommends that I like to use. I like having that length. It feels like I have more control to manipulate where I'm placing the needle in the layers.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I have to say that I like hand understitching too, which is something I came to very, very late, like in the past 2 or 3 years. When I particularly want control over the layers and over the position of the facing and the edge, so that you can get the seam line kind of rolled under a little bit, and you do have very much more control when you do that. I was doing this dress that was made of a very slinky knit, and I wouldn't even normally put a facing in, or I think it was actually fully lined, that one, and I really needed to control that edge, and it was not going to work out to do it by hand. By machine. So I did that by hand. It felt very funny for me to be making something out of sort of a knit and then going through all this handwork to do it, when I usually think of those as being very quick projects. But that called for it. But if I'm using a relatively stable woven, I'll do the kind of traditional way on the machine, though depending on the fabric, sometimes I like to use actually a zigzag stitch. And I know that there are people who think that's kind of weird, but the zigzag gives you a slightly wider band, and it grasps a little bit more of the seam allowances and holds them more firmly, I think, to the facing, and gives it just a little bit more strength to hold all that together, so that the outer layer can just fold over it neatly without having to fight against that seam that wants to kind of roll up and out.
Oh, I think that's a very smart idea.
Yes, I hadn't thought of that.
And
That's
the zigzag
great,
is
Sarah.
nice too, because sometimes if you sew with a straight stitch, it really locks the shape of the neckline in, which is great. You typically want that a little bit, but sometimes I'm not sure it's gonna be exactly right, and you don't want the neckline to kind of be forced into a shape that doesn't have any give. And a zigzag has just a little bit more give. It kind of controls it, but it also has a little bit of flexibility so that the neckline can possibly move a little bit and shape around the body better.
I think I'm going to have to try that next time.
Yeah. Not too wide. Not too wide a zigzag, but a zigzag.
How wide do you recommend?
I don't know what the measurement is. I would say something that's kind of like what I would guess is the default on your machine. And I don't know what that is. It's pretty narrow. It might be, I don't even know if it's that wide. It might be 2.0.
Okay.
Or even a little narrower if you want to. Just look at it and see how far. Some of it depends on how much you're trimming off the seam allowances. Some things require a lot of trimming back, and some don't, depending on how heavy your fabric is. And
that was the other thing I was going to ask you. Does the weight of the fabric determine what size stitch?
It does, because you kind of, the heavier it is, the more control you need.
Right.
And that's another thing. If it's a really beefy fabric, sometimes a straight stitch is just kind of wimpy along the edge.
Yes.
It doesn't really do its job if you get too close to the seam edge. We should, at some point, we should talk to Norma about this. Norma Bucko, our staff seamstress, because she understitches like a demon. Everything is understitched and really beautifully done. There's an article in the Archives of Threads by Norma about how to do understitching so that it's really effective. It's worth looking up.
Right.
Yeah, and I think we've planned to shoot a video with Norma about that too.
Yes, that'll be coming up. Yeah. I don't know has anybody noticed recently whether patterns say to understitch? They didn't used to do it. I think it was a step that was left out in a lot of old patterns, if I recall from when I was younger.
I've noticed recently that they say to do it, but it seems more frequently they're saying to do it without an illustration.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
And I know that sometimes the size of the illustrations in pattern guide sheets, it was confusing because it would be so small and it would only show a portion of the garment. But still, that illustration was nice, especially if it was a situation where you weren't going to be able to completely understitch a seam.
Right.
And they would say understitch as far as possible.
Right.
And now it seems like a lot of times I just see the one-word sentence, understitch.
Right. And the understitch as far as possible, that's where the hand understitching comes in great, because you can stitch all the way anywhere with that. There's no place you can't get to by hand.
Yes, and I think what you were saying about working with a slinky fabric, I think the hand understitching, it can depend on the weight of the fabric too. I found that I really like it with bulky fabrics and with very lightweight fabrics.
Yeah.
And if it's something stable and kind of mid-weight, then the machine. But I really like your tip about the zigzag stitch. I'm going to try that.
If you'd like to suggest a topic for Point and Counterpoint, leave a comment on the show notes for this episode at threadsmagazine.com.
It's time for Q&A, when we answer a sewing-related question. Here's this episode's question. I accidentally ironed fusible interfacing to my favorite silk organza press cloth. Can the press cloth be saved? Does anybody know the answer?
I do know the answer because this happened to me. And I had this one piece of silk organza. It was sort of a skin tone, and I know I could get more, but I had already serged the edges. It was a perfect size, and over time it had softened up a little bit, so I really liked it. And I peeled off as much of the fusible interfacing as possible, but those glue dots were still there.
Right.
And I even tried sort of fusing and pulling those off, and it still wasn't perfect. So I soaked the press cloth in boiling water. And I would recommend doing this carefully because I tried to shift and scrub it a little bit to get that glue off there. The glue did dissolve, and by wearing heavy rubber gloves, I was able to handle it, rinsed it a few times, washed it, and it's as good as new. So I saved my favorite press cloth.
That's excellent. Do you think that could be done with fashion fabric maybe that accidentally got a little bit of fusible on it?
I think a fashion fabric that could withstand hot water and manipulation in very hot water.
Right. Okay. Well,
So we're probably talking about cottons or linens,
Yeah.
natural fibers.
or
natural fibers, yeah.
Yeah, but I think maybe even some blends or some
That's
synthetics
true.
might be okay. And
think so.
it's better than having it on there. You know, you may as well
Yeah.
try it.
That's
Right?
true.
You can't.
Right.
There's not much to lose.
Right. It's only a press cloth, right?
That's right. Well, thank you, Sarah. Send us a sewing question at threadsqa@taunton.com, and it could be answered in the magazine or during an episode of Sewing with Threads.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. We want you to tell us what you think about Sewing with Threads. You can visit threadsmagazine.com to view show notes for this episode and find a link to our podcast survey. While you're on the site, check out Threads Insider, our online membership with exclusive access to expert sewing techniques. Until next time, keep on sewing with threads.